Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Hello and welcome back to Out with Dan. Today I'm going to be chatting with Eli Cranor. Eli is a USA Today and New York Times best book recommendation and an Edgar winner. And we're going to chat amongst other things about Broiler, his book from 2024. Welcome, Eli.
Hey, Dan. Glad to be here, man.
I'm glad you're here as well. And I don't usually get so tongue-tied. I'm just excited. I always rush out of the gate because I'm in such a hurry. I don't really know why. There's no need to be in a hurry. So can you give the audience an overview of what Broiler is about before we get into the meat of it?
Yeah, I mean, at its heart, it's a book about the chicken processing industry, motherhood, and miscarriage, which when you look at me, like, you're like, why the hell did you write about this? But I mean, that's the themes of the book. It really centers around four main characters. They all kind of get equal slice of the time. And it alternates between them. And you have two people that are working on the chicken processing line, like working in the plant. And then they're a couple. And then you have the other two. One is the plant manager and then his wife, and they have a young son. And so how all those kind of converge is what Broiler's about.
It's, the chicken processing world and all of meat processing world is fraught with a lot of issues. It really is. When I get to the grocery store, I'm the one in the meat aisle grumbling that, oh my gosh, this organic chicken cost X amount of dollars. When I should be very thankful that it's not 3 times the price, because if everyone was treated fairly, we wouldn't have chicken that's that affordable. So, was there an impetus for writing this book?
Absolutely. One thing when I've gone around and told people that, what the book's about, one thing that I remember is I started to write Broiler before I'd ever had a book come out. So my first book, Don't Know Tough, came out in 2022. And by the time that book came out, I already had my first 3 books drafted. So and they were actually, there was about 3 books before Don't Know Tough, 3 manuscripts that just need to be burnt. And like nobody ever, because, they were the ones I was learning everything on. And, but it took me about 7 years, in terms of trying to start write novels and then to get in. And so in that time, I just kept writing books. And so I say all that to say, the impetus for this book was I was a teacher, public schools in Arkansas, and I had 2 Hispanic students who just would not stay awake. They just couldn't stay awake on like the first day of class all the way into the first week. And so I eventually figured out that they were working the night shift at the local chicken processing plant. And again, I was writing then. So, always curious, always interested. So I just start asking them, like, what's it like? And so they start telling me about it. It's cold. It's 40 degrees. There's this chemical spray that kind of covers everything for antibacterial purposes. And they wear these ponchos and layer after layer of hoodies. And the boy had this metal mesh glove that he was proud of, because he got to cut the left leg while he had a knife, which you don't always have. So it was these original details that really first started me thinking. And I'm thinking about myself. Both my parents were public school teachers, like very middle class in Arkansas. But my mom used to have to pull the covers off me and flip the lights on to get me out of bed in time for school, all the way through high school. And I'm thinking about these kids working these 10 or 12-hour shifts. That was another detail they mentioned, was really it's just over when the input is done. Like there's no time. It's just however many chickens there are, that's how long you're working. And I'm thinking about their life and getting out of that plant and then coming to school. And they were seniors, so people have asked me about like their age. And And so I really think they were 18 and they were working. A lot of times I was teaching alternative education. So they would have said, you know, bad kids, but they weren't really bad kids. Most of it was credit recovery. So they were kids who needed one more semester to graduate. So these kids were taking it upon themselves to work that job and then come. And even though they were sleeping, like they were in that class because they thought, you know, if I can just make it through this semester, I'll graduate. So that was the very first kind of kernel of an idea. I'm from Arkansas, born and bred, and my first 3 books are just absolutely all Arkansas through and through. And really, there's nothing more Arkansas than a chicken plant. It's a huge industry for us.
It is, and you know, chickens. It's funny because a bunch of friends and I on a group text were talking about eggs recently, and most of the states in the South are big egg producers. We in this country are eating more eggs today than ever.
Oh wow!
And it's a unique thing. I mean, there are something like 400 million eggs produced in this country every year, and I think to myself, that's a lot of chickens. And then of course we process chickens to eat the chicken.
Yeah.
And
And apparently eggs are so important that they can influence a whole election.
That's what we've been sold anyway. So it's really important. So I remember growing up when I was a mid-teenager, when I was 14 and 15, I worked in tobacco. And like you talk about at the chicken processing plant, we worked until the allotment of acreage was done for the day. If it was done in 5 hours or 10 hours, that's what we worked. And I was paid. And it's funny because in reading this, I began to really think about, you know, growing up and all. I was paid the first year $8 a day because I drove the tractor. The second year, because I primed tobacco, I was paid $12 a day. It didn't matter whether it was 5 hours or 10 or 12 hours. I got the exact same pay every day for that work. And we do that with undocumented workers. We treat them like we treated, you know, kids on college or in the fields growing up, you know, agriculture, and we treat undocumented people that way. And one of the things so Luke is the privileged one. He's the plant manager. Yeah. And so I did a lot of thinking about, you know, who is Luke and what does Luke do? And one of the things that I find that you massage so well is the male ego versus weakness.
Yeah.
You know, what is perceived as weak. And how important was that to you to bring about for Luke?
Yeah, it's really important. You know, with all my characters, especially in a book like Broiler, it's important for me to kind of show why the way they are. Like, I think that is always important, but especially in a book like this, where, I mean, I think when I look back at these first 3 books, like you said, I kind of always take an issue. And like most things in the world, there's one side of this issue and there's another side of this issue. And I try to get right in the middle of that and just kind of play both sides as long as I can. And that's really what I tried to do with Luke, you know, because his backstory is, you know, that he had a pretty tough childhood, or at least he believes he did. He worked very hard to ascend to where he is in this plant. He's not a trust fund kid. He's not. So that seed of entitlement and that drive for more and the next thing and the next promotion and more money is really his fatal flaw. You know, it's the thing that and it's really the thing, at least on one side of this equation, that propels the whole novel and the action in the novel forward.
It does. And, you know, what is that old saying? For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And I think that that's something that plays out so well in Broiler, is the fact that one little act, which is not little in anyone's life, but especially Edwin, you know, what happens with him and then what Edwin does because of what happens to him. I mean, it's a huge domino effect. And I just found that it was one of those page turners that I just needed to know exactly what was going to happen next. So, I mean, and I do want to read from the back jacket, because there's a lot of discussion on whether there should be author blurbs on jackets of books.
Yeah.
You happen to get two really good ones. Katie Gutierrez says, "It will sing you a lullaby as it grips you by the throat." And Laura Lippman said, "If you want to understand what's going on in the United States right now, read Eli Cranor." I agree with both authors. It's just so I do this with some authors that something appeals to me. So something as simple as Edwin sees three crows sitting on a fence. It's just a slight detail that you put in, but it is something that Edwin in that very moment would have noticed because his life was just at a place where it was spiraling out of control.
Well, so that's such a good catch, Dan. That's such a close read. And for me, the lines matter. The writing always matters. It's just, and speaking of writing and good writing, Katie and Laura, it meant so much to me. I really went after and asked women writers if they would read the book, early on, and was so just floored and thankful for their response. And another one that blurbed was Daniel Kafka. And so if you've never read Notes on Execution, I've read it a couple times now. I've even taught it. But to circle this all back to that line about the crows, that actually came as deep into the revision process. But it was a trick that Dania actually mentioned to me, a craft trick. And it was, she what did she call them? She had a term. It was called like empty action. And it was anytime someone is turning or anytime someone is walking to the door or all these things that we say, like these stage directions that in a novel, sometimes it's pretty hard to cut them. But 75% of the time, what Daniel's coaching was to go in, take that out and add a concrete detail. Add something about that they see. And if you can do it, like, so for me, a group of crows is called a murder. And Edwin is at this very tense moment of his life. And so it was just this way where a close reader, someone, it's a way to get in Edwin's head without saying Edwin was thinking of murder, Edwin turned to the door thinking of murder, and so that was when Dania told me that, that was another way to get even more because specificity is good writing. And that was just a way to make really add more specifics to every line, every scene.
And this is something I've said on the podcast several times before. What I don't like as a reader is you to tell me 87 descriptions of the color blue. I get it. It's blue. Move on. But when you give me something that's out of the way, and something else, if the listeners want something with atmosphere, Broiler is definitely that. When the two women are sitting on the front steps of the house, of Mimi's house, you can taste and smell the rain. And when they go to the chicken coop before they sit on the steps, they smell the rain. And it's obvious, Southerners, because it rains different in the South than it does in other parts of the U.S. And this is true. So when it rains, it always drops, especially in the summer, 10 or 15 degrees before the rain gets there. You can smell the rain approaching. You can taste it. You can feel it, everything about it. And so those are things that you put into Broiler that for this reader were just so magical because I felt what they were feeling atmospherically, as well as what they were talking amongst themselves and what you, the reader, felt about their conversation. Because there's a lot of things we learn not through directness, but indirectness with your writing. And that's something that was very enjoyable for me.
No, well, thanks so much, man. Yeah, everything hits different in the South. And I'm a guy who I've lived in Boca Raton, Florida, so not a place I would consider the South, and I've lived in Sweden, so I got to get out of the South for a minute, and I've really wrestled with being a Southerner at different times, which you can probably tell from my work, but lo and behold, my wife and I, who are both basically from the same town we graduated high school from, we're here, and so I think that's the way to do it, is to try and get those details right. And that to try and just show it through that stuff. So yeah. So
Yeah.
good catches, man.
Oh, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit. I know this may hit a little close to home, so I want to be
Sure.
careful that I don't trigger anything.
Yeah.
But so the loss of a child figures into this novel quite a bit, and loss in many different ways. So you have two main female characters who lose a child, both the same way and differently. So talk about how you incorporated that into your narrative.
Absolutely, man. Really and truly, that was so. If my students were the seed, um, everything you're talking about there was like it was the water that started to make, because I didn't want to write an expose on the chicken processing industry, and I also was very leery of trying to write about those two Hispanic students, because I'm a white dude from Arkansas. Um, I also knew I couldn't change that part of it. Like there are white people that work in the chicken processing industry. Those numbers are way smaller. That's not so like it's not really the story. Like if you were to try and tell that story, it's not really where the important part of the story is. So I wrestled with all that for a minute. Like, well, how are you going to break into this? And I went around when this book first came out, and my wife traveled with me when we were doing the actual physical part of the book tour. The whole first week she came with me, and I would try and talk about this. I'd try and say all this stuff. And after one of the events, she was like, "Eli, you keep forgetting this one word, and the word is desperation." And she was like, because what happened to us was right around that time, those students were in my life, and I was thinking, man, a chicken processing book, like set in the chicken plant, like that'd be interesting. I didn't know the way to get into it. My wife, we had two miscarriages that happened between our two kids, really two, like in the span of 1 year.
Wow.
And it wasn't the first time, but it was the most desperation we'd ever felt, because we were trying so hard for that, and it was really, I mean, I do think it was one of the first times where we'd butted like, this just might not happen. This is, and what were we willing to do, and what were we willing to try? So my wife, man, I mean, that whole part of it, and then I had it. And then there was like, in terms of the book, and it all came late. I actually wrote this book when our son was like 6 months old, he was our baby who came after all of that. And so he was about the age of the child in the book, Tuck. So I like that, because I was really writing from a place of like, even though I'd had a kid, like I was writing from that sleepless night stage. And then I had, in writing, there's kind of that third rail that it's like, once you enact like that X factor, and it was this big metaphor of new life, lost life, baby chickens, babies, all these metaphors just started to kind of mesh in ways that I couldn't really have predicted, like it was, and then it was off and it was going, but it took that, for me to be like, and again, I was writing this before I had an agent, before I had an editor, before I had a publisher. And I think all that was very important, because I think they would have probably been like, like, let's try something else. Like, hey, man. But since I already had it done, and I already had two semi-successful novels before this, I brought them this book, and they were, and then the editing started, and then the real which we can get into later, because there was so much that was helped, that was cleaned up and to help make it what it is now.
Well, and that was so well done. I mean, I just assumed nobody edited it. I thought you just wrote it from beginning to end. Like, come on now.
Yeah, that's the magic trick.
There's never been an editor, has there? Now, I think that it's thematically, from beginning to end, it is so cohesive. And that is just something that And I really do feel, at least for me, I could see everyone's point of view. I mean, look, in life, if you're a sloth, you don't care whether you get ahead in life. Luke has a goal. He has some things he wants to attend. So he's doing what we call the American dream. He's working really, really hard to get ahead. Gabby is very smart and she is trying desperately to educate herself even more. And that becomes, as undocumented citizens, that becomes very difficult to do that. And you're put at a disadvantage when you really can never get ahead.
Yeah.
If you're never treated fairly, you cannot get ahead. And I'm not taking a side. I'm just saying that in all of society, if you're not treated fairly, you simply don't get ahead.
Yeah.
It takes a village to move us all forward. And not everybody wants everybody to go forward.
Yeah.
I remember the richest man in the little village I grew up in eastern North Carolina. He used to say, if you ever get a man down, make sure you put your foot on his neck, because he intended to remain the richest man in town. And he did. He was always the richest man because he saw, every time he saw an advantage, he took it.
Yeah.
Whether it was
one of my old football coaches.
yeah, right?
Yeah.
There are plenty of them out there, that's for sure. So as a professor, I have what I like to call a strange question. What do you think fiction's responsibility is?
Yeah, man. You know, Stephen King's got that great quote that books are uniquely portable magic. And I've always loved that quote, and I think it's true. But in these times now, I think it's, maybe we'll bump that up a little bit. We'll put an Eli spin on it. And it's just, books are empathy machines. And books are, so in a different way than if you are watching moving images on a screen, a book allows you to get inside the head of people who do not look like you, aren't from where you're from, and really think, you know, because the old saying about walking a mile in somebody's shoes, I mean, travel can do that. You know, travel can allow you to really experience another culture, another people, but without buying a plane ticket, you can do it with a book. And so, man, I don't like, when we were talking a little bit before this, I don't think that it's necessarily a requirement of fiction by any means, but it's, for me, it's one of those deals like, if my book can be well written and hold up on a line level, if it can tell an entertaining story, and if it can teach people something, and that last part's tricky.
Yes.
Because I personally tune out when an author gets on a soapbox and tries to, you know, say something that like I could hear on the news or so, you know, like, and so for me, at least, the way that I try to teach is by doing what we've been talking about with those four characters, like making them seem like real people. Because, you know, like like even really bad people have good days. And then putting them all in a petri dish of a novel and letting it play out and letting it, and again, try to refrain from just saying like what I really want to say. I mean, it's the old workshop, just show, don't tell. But I think that even comes across and is very important when you are trying to build empathy, trying to show and trying to teach, trying to have some sort of moral or a theme to a book. So yeah, I don't know. I think that it's something I strive to do with everything I write.
I agree with you 100%. As I told you before we started recording that I have read the last chapter in Broilers several times, and I managed to cry every time. And I'm promising not to cry on the podcast. I've done that before, but I'm going to try not to do it today. So the ending it's almost a Hollywood ending. And I will tell you that I loved that because I think it fit perfectly. So I don't think it's a surprise, but I think it was if someone's looking for a happily ever after, you gave it to us. Was there a reason why you gave us that as an ending?
Yeah, there was. And I'm going to back up and say this about my editor, because the editor is going to come back into this story.
Okay.
My editor is Juliet Grames. And then also Nick Whitney helped on this book a lot too. but Juliet, especially when it came to the motherhood stuff, she would put quotes out in the margins of the document that say, this is literally what it would say: dude, you sound so much like a dude, like when it is. And so it was great for me to go in and be like, okay, this is a place where I'm really coming off like a dude, like a bro, way too heavy. On any place where she felt like we needed more chicken processing fat, she put it was needs more chicken porn. So then I'd go digging for and she also gave me the best like paradigm for, because this book was a stretch. This book, compared to my first two books, I was stretching my imagination and my ability to things that were outside of exactly things I experienced, things that are very adjacent to me right here in Arkansas, but things that were. And so she said, these are all challenges, Eli. You can take them on if you do one thing: if you meet the challenge with love. And so I wrote that on a post, and stuck it to my computer: meet the challenge with love. So that's all the awesome stuff. But we got to the end of the book, and there was editorial discussion about cutting the last chapter, about chopping it right with, this is not really a spoiler, with Gabby in the Rain. That's where and it would have been a much more open-ended. And there was just, I think it was because, so I talked about my wife. So my wife was I played football, big football guy all the way through. My wife was a pole vaulter. She pole vaulted at the University of Arkansas, had a great career as a pole vaulter. She's more of a jock than I am. So she's always my first reader. And it's kind of a reluctant first reader because she's a very reads the wide middle, so I know if she likes it, well, then it might appeal to this, but for this book, because of the subject matter, she read it about 20 to 40 pages at a time, and we kind of worked through it was almost like a form of therapy. And so when we got to that final question of that final chapter, she looked at me and she was like, Eli, no way in hell are you she was like, as a mother, I need to see that boy. I need to see how this has, the resolution, how it's changed him, There it is. There it is.
Yeah. Thank you, Eli. Yes, because otherwise we're cheated.
Yeah.
And your wife was spot on with that.
I know. She's a smart cookie for sure.
I like that. And it's a collaborative effort. You live under the same roof.
Yeah.
Whether you're the writer or she's the writer, it's always going to be a collaborative effort. So that's a good thing.
It's crazy. She is she does I joke, in our household, all I do is write the books and do I'm a good with the kids, disciplinary, but I mean, even for writing, she does all of the accounting stuff, it's crazy. So I'm very lucky to have Mallory in my life.
That's a lovely thing. So what are you working on now?
Oh man, let me grab it. So we got galley copies, and it is completely different, man.
All right.
But I've been working on it for about 8 years. So
okay.
I would go back to it in between all these other books because it was so different. But it's called Mississippi Blue 42.
I love it.
And it's about a fictional federal investigation into the big money world of college football.
Mm-hmm.
So it features a rookie FBI agent fresh out of Quantico. She's first in her class in the academy, heart set on joint terrorism task force, all this stuff. And then she gets sent to this Delta town in Mississippi to do a white collar crime investigation into big money football. And it takes her about 24 hours to realize that the joint terrorism task force don't got nothing on what's going down in this Delta town, and the reason she's sent there is because her dad is a big time coach from Arkansas. So it's totally different. But I think it does those three things that we talked about. It has line by line writing. It's entertaining. And it also has a lot to say about the price of that game and what's going on at that level. So So yeah, I'm very excited. Much more in the vein of like Carl Heiss and Elmore Leonard, who are guys that I just absolutely, I think Carl always has something to say too, you know, with his books as well.
I love it. Will you come back and discuss it once it's out?
Absolutely.
I love it. Thank you so much, Eli. Again, the book is called Broiler. It is so magnificent.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at OutWithDan.com, on Twitter at OutWithDan, and on Instagram and Facebook at GoOutWithDan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.